Hello, hello, hello. It's Lauren Young Durbin, the CEO and founder and coach extraordinaire of Taiki Career Coaching. And I'm here with one of my former clients, Mehroz Baig, and she's amazing. And I'm so excited to have her with us today. So she is a strategic communications and culture consultant who helps organizations create meaningful experiences that shape employee engagement and foster inclusion and belonging. She has a background in journalism, DEI, and internal communications. She focuses on aligning internal messaging with organizational values to build cultures that drive strategic advantage. Through her practice, she partners with mission-driven teams to create more intentional, connected, and people-centered workspaces. So, welcome, Mayrose.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here.
I know. I love talking to you. I know, like, I always look forward to our sessions because I'm like,
Likewise.
it's just real. So why don't you tell me what made you strike out on your own and open your consultancy?
Sure. Well, some of it was timing, and some of it was a lot of reflection on just kind of what I wanted to do next. So I think the very real practical reason was that my team was unfortunately laid off last year. And
Yeah.
so it was a bit of an abrupt moment, but it gave me the opportunity to really take a step back and think about what comes next. What do I
Yeah.
want to do? What type of an organization do I want to work for? And what type of work do I want to invest my working days in? And what occurred to me was that I like having my own autonomy, right? My own ability to kind of pick what I'm working on, pick the folks I'm working with on some of these efforts, and really dive deep into projects, right? I think so often in the workplace, things are moving so fast, it's really hard to sometimes be able to do that deep dive. But consulting allows me to really focus in on one project at a time and go deep. So I think thinking about some of this kind of in the background, and then realizing that my skill set, it's a combination of having done DEI work, having done communications, and then really focusing on both of those elements, bringing employee experience to the forefront. I think this is something that is valuable, and it's an avenue through which I can support other organizations that want to focus on employee experience and that really want to create a space where people feel like they belong, people feel like they want to do their best work. And so perhaps I give it a shot and see how it goes. And so that's kind of how it started. And yes, it's been fun and exciting, a little bit scary,
Mhm.
kind of all the things that come with starting something new and different.
So, so here's the thing. Lots of people think about like, I'm going to open my own, I'm going to start my own business. Lots of people, unfortunately, are being laid off or fear
Yeah.
they're going to be laid off. Why did you, and lots of people want to have that autonomy. So what was different for you to go from thinking, dreaming about having your autonomy and picking your own clients? It's great. It's a great feeling. To actually doing it.
Sure. So I think it wasn't necessarily one particular moment, but
Mhm.
it probably a combination of things, right? One of the things I noticed was that in my work in-house and then also separately with my kind of peer networks, folks would tap me for questions and would kind of ask my thoughts about, a certain idea that they had, or have I had experience doing X, Y, or Z, kind of use me as a sounding board. And I found I'm happy to do that. And I think that's something that I feel good about doing, right? I'm happy to kind of get on a quick Zoom call, help people think through what they're thinking about. But what occurred to me was that maybe I could just do that as my work, right? Part of consulting is obviously kind of doing very deliverable focused work, but a lot of it is also being a thought partner, being very strategic about what can you do or how can you think about something in a different way. And so some of it, just kind of having these conversations with friends and colleagues and peers, made me think, there is value in what I bring to the table. So perhaps it's worth exploring. I think the other piece, and this is probably where I had to like coax myself a little bit, is kind of approaching this as a little bit of an experiment. I'm not necessarily saying, okay, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just going to focus on consulting and start this business. And to be fair, this requires a lot of time and effort, no doubt about it. But
Right.
I am taking it as let's try this and see what happens. Very cognizant of the fact that there can be ebbs and flows in how these things work. And so my hope certainly and my goal is to make this as successful as possible. And my approach is one that allows me to hopefully test out a few things, see what works, see what doesn't, tweak as needed, and then kind of approach the drawing board again. So I I think being able to think about it in that way of let me see how this goes, and I'm going to
Mhm.
put some pieces together, test it out, and then go from there, rather than trying to have it all laid out on the front end and then make it happen, helps me kind of push it out the door a little bit more easily.
And when they say leap in, a net will appear, or you hope it
Yes,
appears. Yeah, I think about that every day.
exactly, exactly.
So we've talked a little bit, we've kind of talked around like what's led you to having your consulting business. So let's actually talk about the business.
Sure.
What is it? What do you do? Who do you help? Tell me all about
Yes, absolutely. So my work really focuses on three main elements within any given organization: internal communications, inclusion and belonging, and employee experience. And really, the crux of my work is that internal comms and inclusion and belonging create an employee experience that ideally sets up any organization for success if you do
it.
it right. I've seen organizations where the internal culture maybe isn't up to par, and that shows up not just in how people are experiencing the workplace, but also ultimately in the products and services those organizations offer. And on the flip side, I've seen organizations where there's real intention and clarity around what it is that leadership wants the culture to be. And then when that shows up in the day-to-day behaviors that people see and experience, you get a lot more not only levity, but also just motivation and inspiration. And people are excited about the work that they want to do. We're all going to be showing up to work anyway, so we might as well enjoy that process, right? And so for me, I think it's really about helping organizations get to that point of recognizing what is their cultural advantage and how do they embed that and make it happen for their employees. In terms of organizations, I mean, I think I sort of see my work both spanning across teams and then also organizations. So it could be a team of folks within a large organization that really want to think about how they're coming together to work. Are there particular experiences they want to have? Is there an offsite they're trying to put together where they want to have something meaningful come out of that? So it could be something like that, or it could be organizations as a whole, probably like small to mid-size, that are really looking at what are the elements that their employees experience on a day-to-day basis when they come to work, and are those the most beneficial to them? And if they're not, how do we kind of figure out ways around that to make sure that they're optimized for an employee experience that is truly valuable? So whether it's nonprofit sector, whether it's the public sector, whether it's tech, where I've done a lot of work as well, I'm not necessarily particular about the sector, because I think the idea
Yeah.
of employee experience spans across all sectors, right? You want to have true, valuable, and meaningful spaces for people to be present and be able to contribute and feel like they're valued. And those can exist anywhere in the world and anywhere in any industry. I think what it requires is committed leadership and committed kind of team leaders who are willing to just take a step back and think about some of these things and think about what it takes to be intentional in creating some of that space.
So where does internal communication fit in that?
Sure. So I think internal communications is kind of the glue of all of this, right? How we talk about things, what we say, the tone and message with which we say it, it's all critical. Sometimes internal comms doesn't have a DEI lens to it. And so thinking about that is also another piece that I am particularly fond of, is really exploring that intersection of how are we messaging internally? Is it clear and is it concise and is it aligning to an organization's mission and values? And then separately, is it keeping in mind this added element of inclusion, right? We're
Mhm.
talking about global organizations. How do you talk across cultures? How do you think about various audience demographics? Because all of that stuff you think about an external comms, but sometimes that gets lost when you're internally focused. And the fact of the matter is that internal demographics also matter. And you're going to have different audience segments. You're going to have different elements that need to be addressed in different ways internally. So what's that story that we're telling on the internal side of the house? And so that's really where that piece comes in.
So what's the difference between belonging and inclusion and DEI?
Sure. Um, they're they very much overlap, but I think a lot of it is semantics, right? Like at the end of the day, a lot of elements that fall within a DEI framework are also part of an inclusion and belonging framework.
Mhm.
But depending on how you parse it, and this can be based on organization to organization, there are elements that can be more concrete versus more broad. So at the end of the day, inclusion and belonging is really about looking at holistically the entirety of the workforce and thinking about what are some elements that need to be in play in order to
Mhm.
make sure that people feel like they can contribute to the best of their abilities and have equitable access to opportunities. So this can be things like looking at work styles and how do teams support different work styles. It can be things like looking at discrepancies along race and gender demographics. Those also happen on the DEI front. So it's not necessarily separate from that, but it is
Right.
part of that. DEI also tends to include things like ERGs or affinity groups, so employee resource groups within an organization, affinity groups, and inclusion and belonging is not any different. I think a lot of organizations, if they are focusing more broadly on inclusion and belonging, will still likely have some elements of ERGs at play. And so thinking about what do ERGs need? What do ERG leaders need? How are they being effective? What is the bar at which we are measuring effectiveness? And how do they integrate into the company culture? I think all of those elements are still at play. So I wouldn't say that they're inherently different by any means. I think in today's context and the landscape, we've just seen some of the language shift a little bit. So it's just not being called DEI necessarily. But I think for me, all the elements that have always been a part of kind of DEI efforts as a whole will continue to be part of inclusion and belonging efforts. And then more broadly, you can expand from that. So you can think about things like manager enablement. You can think about things like geographic distribution. You can think about things like, even age distribution. And ideally, DEI teams would also be doing all of this work. But when you put it under that bigger umbrella, you can bring in a lot more of those elements to really think holistically about what's going on within any organization.
So how, I love what you're saying. I love what you're doing. How would a organization know they need to bring in someone like you? Like what kind of organization do you like to work with, prefer
Sure.
with? Because it matters. I mean, it's a partnership. So
Yes. Absolutely. So I think organizations that either have seen a level of change over time, and this can be changes in leadership, it can be changes within, if they're doing kind of pulse surveys and measuring employee sentiment, it can be change in employee sentiment,
Mhm.
and any kind of sort of differentiator that says, hey, something was working and now it's not working anymore. So what
Right.
happened? I think that's one very clear indicator of, well, it might be helpful to have somebody come in and help us assess what is going on. It can be very specific. It can be organizations that have, say, employee resource groups, for instance, and they know that they want them to be more effective. They just don't know how to do that. That's a really great way for me to pull in and say, I can work with your ERGs, or I can do a needs assessment and figure out what they might need. I can
Mhm.
help provide an infrastructure or create some sort of a growth model for them to help them see how they can grow over time. It can be things like when it comes to messaging. So again, when I talk about kind of internal messaging with a DEI lens, a lot of times I think executive teams can have a hard time thinking about how to respond to certain instances or how to think about messaging in a way that's really kind of inclusive of their workforce. And so if they're having a hard time aligning internal messaging with, again, their values and then also this added piece around inclusion and belonging, that's something I can help with. So it can be very strategic and high level of like, hey, we have these questions and we're not entirely sure of how best to address them, in which case my job is more diagnostic, right? Like I come in and I really kind of think about what are all the elements that play and where might be where we start to make an impact. Or it can be very tactical of, hey, we've got ERGs, or we have this DEI report we need to put together, or, we have an offsite coming up, but we really want to make it meaningful and we don't know how to do it, or we don't have the bandwidth for it. And then in those cases, I have a very specific mandate of thinking about still all of these elements, but in a very different and tactical context.
So I'm going to ask you a real talk question.
Yeah.
So especially like you said, given the current environment around DEI, there are a lot of people who were formerly employed as DEI experts within companies, and they've been let
Yeah.
go or they've been reassigned or whatever. And a lot of them have become consultants. I know quite a few. So what makes you different from that plethora of other people?
Sure. So I think for me, it's really the combination of disciplines and skills that I bring to the table, right? I'm not just doing DEI programming, but I'm really thinking about that intersection of communications, DEI, and then more broadly employee experience. So it's all three of those pieces in one place. And really what I strive to do is sort of be a translator, if you will, between those three disciplines in a way that connects all of them and leverages all of them. Because, like I said, they're all so interconnected. You can't really do comms without thinking about how someone will experience them. You can't
Right.
think about employee experience without thinking about this broader sense of inclusion and equity and how does that show up in the workplace. You can't be clear, you can't be empathetic, you can't be concise without those elements at play. And so all of those pieces play off of each other. And it's the how they play off of each other that I think becomes really important, especially for organizations that are, either remote first or fully remote. We're talking about distributed teams. We're talking about communication that's often asynchronous. We're talking about people who are somewhat removed and are not showing up in the same conference room, right? And
Right.
if they are meeting up for a retreat or something, it has to be deliberate. It can't just be, hey, let's get everyone together and we'll spend 2 days doing whatever. Like you want to use that time as effectively as possible. And so I think for me, I bring all of those pieces to the table to really then step back and say, what is the why behind this? What's our objective? And how do we make that happen? So it's
Mhm.
not simply just a one-off endeavor, but it is part of your strategic plan for growth. And it's part of your team's efforts to really elevate whatever it is that you're working on. Um,
Mhm.
and I'd like to think that that is hopefully valuable to folks.
If someone asked me, do you know any DEI consultants? And I mean, you would be my first choice. And
Oh, thank you.
the reason, I'm not just saying that, because I'm interviewing you. That's why I'm saying it. No, but and then like I said, we've worked together. And I would say the big thing is kind of when you're talking about how things fit in together, it is your background. Like you have a master's in journalism. So that's the communication piece. I know I consider you an ERG expert. What does that say? It's not employee relations. What does ERG stand for?
Employee resource groups.
Yes, employee resource groups. I consider you an expert in that. You've worked with tech. You've worked with different industries. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're stuck in a different industry. So it's you have someone who has the academic and the practical background. You've worked deeply in DEI in places where DEI may not be DEI forward.
Yeah.
Tech. I said it, tech. Don't turn off my Zoom. Um, so that's why I would say that's my answer. That's my plug for you. That
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah,
And I
your
do think there
education.
is something about the context within which all of these pieces operate, right? Like
Yeah.
part of that work and part of having seen it in so many different industries, I think has really helped me, one, recognize where things work best, but then
Yeah.
also that approach, that experimental piece that I talked about when starting this consultancy is actually very important to also this work in general, right?
Mhm.
Nobody has this figured out yet because if they
No.
did, these roles would not exist. And so part, I think, of the process is that you do have to try new things and be willing to experiment a little bit and see what happens. How do people respond? What works within your organization, and what works for one team may not work for another. So being able to take some of those learnings and apply them elsewhere, I think all of that becomes really, really valuable as you progress in these efforts. And I think for me, it's been really helpful to see that over the progression of my career and how it shows up. And then be able to take those elements and say, I saw this work in this one organization, or this didn't work here for this reason, but I think it can work here for that exact reason. Let's see what we can do. And I think a lot of that provides a level of insight that you can't really pick up from an article or a book. It's sort of lived experience that comes through.
Me and my love of alliteration. I'm like
Yes.
education, experience, and expertise. That's that's me. You can steal it. I was
Okay,
listening to,
sounds good.
I know it sounds fabulous. I might steal it. I don't know. Actually, wouldn't be stealing for myself. That'd be weird.
Right, right. No
So
reason why you both can't use it.
yes, it's very general.
Yes.
We're see it like some billboard. So you're new to this, but what's the thing that you found to be most surprising about this whole enterprise?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I expected things to be uncertain and I
Mm.
expected them to be scary, and all of that's held true. But I think what's been most surprising for me is also how energizing it is. It's like when you get the little wins, or when you connect with
Yes.
somebody who's been thinking about this, or even just, some of the projects I've been able to take on so far, being able to show up and say, this is what I think we should do, and having that be received in a way that's welcoming and almost like a relief, like, oh, thank you for somebody for telling me this because I wasn't sure. I think that's been really, really energizing to get that reception of, yeah, we agree. And also, can you help us do this? So that's been very affirming for me because I think in my mind, I was like coming up with all these scenarios of like, oh gosh, I'm going to show up and say this thing. And they're going to be like, oh no, how dare you? Like, we can't do that. Like, get out of here. And it hasn't quite materialized in that way, and I'm very grateful for that.
So you've mentioned the way that you've done business, like how you do business. How have your values shaped the way that you do business?
Sure. So I think for me, there are a number of things that are just always going to hold true and are very important, right? One is the idea of context and where and within which kind of parameters are we operating.
Mhm.
One is integrity and really coming to this work from a place of curiosity and empathy and understanding, but also recognizing that there are certain things that hold true. And I know kind of how certain elements of this work. And I think ultimately, of just really being open and honest about what I'm seeing. And so for me, that's how I approach clients normally. And this is how I approach this work. And it's so far had some returns. And I think part of that is, I think part of it is the luxury of being outside of an organization. You can be a little bit more candid, you can be a little bit more honest.
Mhm.
And I recognize, having been in-house, that that's not always something that people can rely on. But
Yeah.
I think separately too, it is about just bringing my experience to the table and saying, hey, I've seen this before. And so I'm telling you this from that experience. I'm not just making this up, or it's not a hunch. It is actually, it's been proven in my past life in this way. And I think that adding that
Your
level of
past life.
credibility, right? In my past life. And so I think that adds a level of credibility that, again, people respond to because they're like, okay, that's a helpful context for me to have. So being able to really set that stage for folks is something that I care about. Again, being clear and, being open. Those are things that have always been important to me. And it's something that I've incorporated into this work.
Fabulous. So how, or I guess I should start with, did our work together help prepare you for this next chapter in your life book? This life,
Yeah.
I suppose your past life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think back to when we first connected, and I think we connected at a time when I was really in sort of a turbulent stage with my kind of work setup. And you're probably one of the first people who I was started talking to about, what do I do here? How do I sort of explore this and navigate this period of my life? because there are certain elements of the work that I really care about, but then there are certain elements of the context that are making it really hard for
Right.
me to navigate the situation. And, I think you asked the types of questions that helped me get on this path. Because like I said, it wasn't necessarily an aha moment of like, yes, now I'm doing this and I'm going to go start. It has been building up over time. And so being able to kind of ask questions and get me thinking about what is it that I want out of my professional life and career? How do I want to approach this work? Again, what values do I hold true? And how are they showing up or how are they not showing up in my day-to-day professional life? And really thinking about kind of what the possibilities could be. I think all of those were sort of seeds to this moment, right? Of really starting to think about what else is out there and how else could I structure my life to be a little bit more aligned with what I care about and what I want and how I want to contribute to the world. And so I think those conversations really started to get me on that path of slowly thinking about, breaking out a little bit of that mold because
Mhm.
again, it's for me at least, it's hard to not do that thing that you've just been taught to do your
Exactly.
whole life, right?
Yes.
Like you go to school, you do the thing, you get a job, you do that thing, and then whatever. And this is a little bit different from that. It's sort of creating my own job in a way that I find, I think, really liberating, but also, again, kind of nerve-wracking, right? And so I think those questions and those conversations really sort of laid the path for me to think about this more deliberately and to think about again, what the possibilities can be
Mhm.
farther down the line.
So if someone came up to you, they watched this amazing video of ours, and they said, I'm thinking about making that leap. What advice would you give them?
I think I would say figure out the kind of building blocks that you need, right? What is it that you need to feel like you are making progress for yourself? Because that's going to look different for everybody, right? What I set as my bar is going to be different than what somebody else needs theirs to be, both in practical terms and also in kind of more philosophical, aspirational terms. But I also will say, you don't have to be 100% ready to kind of make that leap. You can test things out. You can run experiments. You can try doing things incrementally if that feels a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing solution, if you will. And I think for me, it took a while to understand that piece, really, to just recognize that it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but I can test out the waters and I can kind of experiment and figure things out as I go. I don't have to know everything right off the bat. And to be fair, I won't. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's so much that comes up. There's so much. And you just think about the
Changing.
landscape we're operating in, so much that's changing every
Yeah.
day, every week. There's no way to anticipate all the twists and turns you're going to encounter. So that's okay.
Yeah.
Trust in kind of the foundation you've laid for yourself and then go from there.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice is, well, okay, start. Like you said, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, just
Yeah.
thinking about figure out your why because
Yeah.
this isn't an easy journey and you have to remember why you're doing this. And
Absolutely.
practical terms, you kind of alluded to it. I'm just going to say figure out how much you need financially to feel okay to
Yeah.
go full time.
Yes.
And if you're not quite there yet, you can do it as a side gig until
Yeah.
you are at that point where you're like, if you aren't forced to make a decision, well, you always have to make a decision, but just, you know, you don't have to jump into it 100%. It's okay
Yeah.
to start that way. Um, so just start. Like if someone comes up to you or me or someone, there's like, I've been thinking about it. They didn't just start thinking about it in the shower that morning.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
been happening for a second. Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
So start, just get
Yeah.
started. Even just checking that book out of the library.
Hmm.
In this economy, books are expensive.
Yeah, no,
Check that
seriously,
book
I love
out.
the library. Especially you get Libby, you get your ebook set up, and then you don't even have to
Yes.
go if you don't want to. But yeah, I think to your point, also just talking to other people who've done this type of work too can be
Mhm.
really helpful, I found. And people are so kind when I think just generally speaking, when find that you have questions or that you just want to hear about their experience of, hey, I know you started something like this a while ago. What was it like? I just want to get some perspective because obviously everyone's story is going to be different and your path is going to
Yes.
be different. Your experience will be different. But I do think there's some value to just getting that camaraderie built out, like
Yeah.
having a few folks who have been there who, if ever you need to just send a quick note to say, I had a really good day today, and it was like my first in a while, and I'm really excited about it. Having that network to share it with, or if you run across a challenge where you're like, I don't know how exactly to navigate this. Is this something you ever come across? I think creating that sort of space and creating that set of people who you can connect with on that front can also be really helpful. And whether it's moments again of celebration or of needing to just assess something, it's valuable to have that network.
Yeah, and along those lines, a big resource, a big and free resource is SCORE. It's
Hmm.
SCOR, no E. And it's for small businesses and it's fabulous and it's free. They might have classes that may cost, but they're always very reasonably priced. So if you're thinking about starting your own business, that's a huge resource. And you can sign up for a mentor too. So it's,
That's great.
yeah, I love SCORE. That's how I kind of started. They had this great like how to start a business. So we're going to do a lightning round. We've talked a
Okay.
lot professionally about things. So we're going to switch it up. Um, so the first question is, what's your favorite way to recharge?
I love being creative, honestly. Anything I can do, like build with my hands, is something I'm really into. So recently I got into quilting, which has been like a fabulous sort of little hobby. It's not even a little hobby anymore, but I've got stacks of fabric everywhere. So it's becoming a big hobby. But I love how much I can learn in the space, right? Like there's so many techniques and so much
Yes.
stuff you can learn just thinking about how to bring different pieces of fabric together into patterns. So, I spend a lot of time quilting. I like cooking and baking, so that's also another place where I can explore a little bit. Like sometimes I get a little experimental, but sometimes I'll, follow a tried and true recipe and make something that like I feel good about eating and sharing with my friends and family. So that's always nice to do. And then getting outside. I'm based right outside of Sacramento, so it's starting to get very, very hot here.
Oh,
Uh,
already?
yeah, we got our like first triple digit day over
What?
this past weekend. It was a little bit much. I have to tell you, I'm never gonna get used to the heat here. I know
Goodness.
this already about myself, but when it's not boiling temperatures, I do love to get outside. So sometimes it means like waking up really early in the morning and just like getting outside for a
Yeah.
little bit or waiting until later in the evening to be able to do that these days. But for the rest of the year, when it's not summer, it's actually quite pleasant. So being, whether it's a neighborhood walk or going on a hike or, even just like having dinner outside because it's pleasant enough to do that. I think those are moments that I enjoy that sort of bring me back to myself as a person.
So we talk a little bit about library books and Libby. So do you have any book recommendations or podcast recommendations that you love to like listen to? Because I'm always looking for a book and
Yeah,
podcasts. I can't
absolutely.
possibly listen to all the podcasts I have on my phone, but I'm always looking for recommendations.
No, for sure. So I'll give you two.
Okay.
One is one of my absolute favorite books, The Overstory by Richard Powers. It's
Oh,
fiction, and it's just this beautiful story that spans sort of multiple generations. And it's got a lot of elements of nature in it. I don't really want to give too much of it away, except for that it's definitely worth a read. Like, immerse yourself in that story because it's so cozy and in some ways so inspiring to me. I loved reading it, and it's just always one of my recommendations for anyone who asks for one. The other one I'll say is the other one's nonfiction, and I haven't gone through it yet. It's actually an audiobook I'm listening to right now, but it's called "But What Will People Say?" And it's by Sahaj Kaur Kohli. And she is a mental health professional who talks about the intersection of mental health and the immigrant experience, and kind of this notion of what does it look like for not only immigrants but children of immigrants to navigate not only dual, sometimes multiple cultures, but then also kind of this added lens of how do you support that from a mental health capacity? It's really, really, I think, one, fascinating for me, um, but two, just incredibly insightful to kind of read while I'm listening to her experience, listen to her experience, and kind of see some of not necessarily some of the parallels, but I think for me it's just prompting a lot of reflection. So I'm going through it slowly because I want to make sure I absorb it all, but I'm really enjoying it right now.
Well, it's been great talking to you. It's always great talking to you. So,
Likewise.
where can people find you? Where can they're like, I need my May Rose.
Yes, absolutely. Well, everyone's on LinkedIn these days, so I
Yes.
also happen to be there. So you can certainly find me there. Just Google my name, I'll pop up. But then my website is also very much a resource open to folks. It's got a lot more information on the types of work I can do for organizations and how you might engage if you're interested. It's just mehrozbaig.com. So feel free to check that out also.
Yes. And her name is down in the corner. So if you have
Yes.
any questions, it's right there. You shouldn't have any questions. I'll spell her name. It's right there. So, again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's
Of
always a pleasure to
course.
talk to
Thank
you,
you.
and I learned a lot. And I have these two books that I need to look up. I'm very excited about that. I get very excited about books.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Me too. If you ever have any recommendations, please also feel free to pass on. And thanks so much
Oh,
for the opportunity. It's always so much fun to connect and just chat.
yeah.
And I'm glad we got a chance to do that today.
I always love to follow up with my clients. I'm just gonna say clients because never former clients because I'm always
Sure.
emailing you. I'm like, what are you doing? How are you doing? What's going on? Just because I'm interested. I was part of your journey and I'm nosy.
Absolutely.
So I
Well, and
want to know.
that's so much of what kind of any of this work is, right? It's like establishing those relationships and having the human connection. And I don't think that has to go away just because the sort of official engagement has ended. So very much appreciate that approach.
Yes. You learned from the best.
Right.
Good. All right. Well, you guys check her out at Mehroz Baig. I'm having a hard time saying mehrozbaig.com. Again, check her out on LinkedIn. If your business is interested, check her out. If you work for a business and maybe you're like, we can definitely use some help, recommend her to your manager or decision maker. Because I know I've been on that end when it's just kind of like, okay, you say that you're for this, but I don't see any. But yeah, so take initiative. It's okay if you're just, a foot soldier. Just bring it up the ladder. Again, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.